Today we're going to use this rebuild kit to rebuild this Mercedes C.I.S fuel distributor. Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. We will start by removing the EHA, which may not be the case for your car fuel distributor, depending on which Jetronic version you have. You want to measure the depth of the plunger control nut. However, if the fuel distributor is no virgin, you might want to use 0.6 mm for the assembly process. This fuel distributor is as far as can be from virgin, so I'm going to use 0.6 mm. I believe the location of the two big inlet and outlet fittings has been reversed, but I will look at that when the small fuel filter arrives for installation. This is the fuel filter, which we're gonna change once installed in the car. As you probably noted, I went ahead and cleaned the distributor after I removed the EHA to prevent dirt from going inside it. Now let's spin the retainer shim and remove the sleeve. There are many ways of doing this. You can remove the plunger nut first, however, this is what I've chosen to do. And from the look of the shim, I knew this fuel distributor is no virgin. As you will see next, I removed the nut from the sleeve off camera by holding the sleeve in a vise and rotating the nut with a strong plastic trim tool to avoid any damage. There's an alignment mark on the plunger barrel. Take a note of its orientation. Let the plunger slide out, don't get it scratched, only clean it with a brake cleaner or less aggressive cleaners and without any tools, and keep it in a safe place. The most important steps for a good rebuild product is cleanliness and organization. Now let's remove the 12 Torx head bolts that hold the two halves of the distributor. The number could be different depending on the model, but it's always the Torx head, not the hex. You want to leave two of them threaded in a couple of turns for the time when you're ready to separate the two halves. Now if you are lucky, you should be able to wiggle and separate them, but if you are like me, use a heat gun or hair dryer, heat the distributor until you feel it reached its safe temperature like 80 Celsius, or a gap started to form between the two halves. And as you will see now, we have a gap. So let's remove the two remaining bolts and let's pull it apart while it is sitting as if it's in the car.
Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
I am marking the injection ports in relation to which cylinder in the car. This will visually help me to reinstall each component to where it came from. Take your time as you don't want the springs to shoot out. I will have to say the plastic disc or valves should come out easily, but in our case I believe someone glued them into the diaphragm. So we numbered the lower and upper chamber discs and set them aside for now attached to the diaphragm. Is it a diaphragm or diaphragm? I think you know what I'm talking about if you've seen other CIS videos. We later used a plastic tool to unstick and remove these discs. Be very careful not to scratch, break, or even bend those. Now let's remove the plunger barrel by pressing it with a wood stick. Those O-rings which form the passage from the barrel to the upper chamber will be replaced. We're going to remove these springs as well. This job is only to hold the O-rings in place. There are two O-rings in the lower part that the kit had. I replaced both, however, for a reason I don't have the footage for doing so. There is one O-ring in the barrel need to be replaced that the kit had. The other one is a Teflon ring, leave it in place. Note that I'm comparing each O-ring and lubricating each one with a liquid lithium grease. You can use engine oil or transmission fluid. I couldn't show any cleaning steps in the video, or it will be a 2 hours video, but every part was cleaned thoroughly and inspected for damage. Mainly the two halves with every hole in them, the barrel and its filter screen, the discs and the plunger. Now install the barrel by first aligning the mark correctly. Make sure each hole is pointing toward the center of an injection chamber and then pressing it in place. You will hear a click when it sits in place. We now started to install the springs, so we can install the O-rings on them later. Install them to extend as far as the thickness of the O-rings. Later we will push them in until they clear the edge of the O-rings. Here we already installed two O-rings. Weird enough, one of the O-rings came in black, while the others were brown. We lubricated each O-ring and installed it around the spring. Now we started to lightly push and feel the springs until they just clear the edge of the O-rings, as you don't want them to extend and hit the inner machine surface of the upper half. Installation is the reverse of removal. Thank you, Bosingers. Oh wait, that's what the Heinz manual would say, but not me. Let's start by putting these caps each in its corresponding place. I will have to say that we did not touch the lower half adjustment screws, which are hidden behind these hex caps. They correspond to the number of cylinders, and I don't suggest you do as well. Some sources say that you measure their depth and take them out for cleaning. But we did the measurement and they were all within 0.08 mm from each other, so we decided to leave them alone. These will require a sophisticated flow testing rig to be adjusted, but we do it in the car with a twist. Not 100% accurate, but I would say 90% at least. When we first install a rebuilt distributor in the car, we will leave the injectors line disconnected, jump start the fuel pump, push and hold the airflow plate slightly, and then monitor fuel rise in each line cavity, and they should be the same. If there are differences, they can be adjusted. Quarter return time, clockwise for less fuel and counterclockwise for more fuel. And repeat the test with the different flow plate deflections. When I'm done putting the lower discs, I like to shake things up just to make sure nothing is just sitting on the edge. Now to place the diaphragm, insert two bolts on opposing sides. Orient the diaphragm correctly as it has 3 cuts around its center. They correspond to similar cuts in the lower aluminum casting. And now push the screws through the diaphragm, and when you are done, inspect the lower half components for any movement. Now we attach each upper disc to its spring. The disc has a tab to allow the spring to look in it. A small touch of silicone grease on the bottom of the disc will help locating it on the diaphragm and secure it in place. You want to locate it as close as possible over the center of the lower chamber. But then we will do more adjustments using my high school toothbrush. You want to use the bottom of the toothbrush, squeeze lightly on the disc, feel if it's centered over the lower chamber, and move it around. You can even see it in the way the diaphragm deflects. And now for the big event. For this part, I suggest you have an expert helper. I use my blind cameraman. You want to push and wiggle the upper half down the way while he monitors the components inside from any shifting. The wiggling motion should be at minimum. In addition, I lubricated the center cavity of the upper half to allow these 8 O-rings a smoother slide. Stop if you feel excessive resistance and don't force the two halves using their screws. Once it's all the way in, hand tighten a couple of screws. As you can see, I'm giving the screws a last step cleaning, and I don't suggest using any oil on them. We will next tighten these to between 7 and 10 Newton meter. I went for 9. I will be using my impact gun to tighten these first, but only using the hand tight function, and that's only to expedite things. As in animating surfaces, you want to tighten them in a crisscross pattern. Once we started to torque them, use a marker to cross the ones that you already torqued. Let's now put the spring and the plunger. I cleaned both, lubricated the plunger with the transmission fluid and wiped it. The plunger should slide in easily. The only resistance is caused by the spring and the air pocket behind it. When it's installed, it should slide in and out easily and smoothly. Now let's install the locking shim, the sleeve, and the plunger nut. The sleeve get tightened to between 3 and 5 Newton meter. I used 4. Once it's tightened, you want to bend the shim around the sleeve to secure it in place. The shim has another bent edge to secure itself to the lower part of the fuel distributor. Because both pins were damaged from somebody being here before me, I elected to rotate the shim 90 degrees to make new bends. Next, we'll replace and lubricate the O-ring on the plunger nut. Now we need to drive the nut to a default depth of 0.6 mm. I started by using the plastic tool, but then stronger force was needed. And I would have made a special tool for it, but because of the limited time, I elected to drive it by a screwdriver and a hammer. Be extra careful not to damage the nut or the plunger. I started to take measurements and adjust until I was happy with 0.58 mm. I have to say the job is not as hard as you would expect. There wasn't many tools used as well. And I will try to leave some information and links in the video description for some important resources. By the end of this step, we are done. And I decided not to install the exterior fittings and the EHA until we have it installed in the car and tightened to specs. And until the time comes to install it in the car, this will be wrapped and protected. And until then, why you don't hit that subscribe button? Thank you boys and girls for watching, and remember, if you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing. Bye bye.